It was one of those perfect late August nights, the kind that almost makes you forgive the hellish heat of the preceding month. The air was thick with the smell of charcoal, cheap beer, and freshly cut grass. My friend Owen had a decent-sized backyard, and it was filled with the low murmur of about 20 people, their faces lit by a string of kitschy fairy lights. I was on my third beer, leaning against the deck railing, just soaking it all in. It was a good crowd, a mix of college buddies and newer work friends. I felt safe. That's the only word for it. It was a pocket of uncomplicated, straightforward happiness. And then there was Silas, my boss. He wasn't just a boss. He was the boss, the guy who ran the entire regional division. It was weird seeing him here in a faded polo shirt and cargo shorts, holding a plastic cup just like the rest of us. At the office, he was a force of nature, sharp, impossibly charismatic, the kind of guy who could sell you your own shoes and make you thank him for the opportunity. I'd only been at the company for a year, working as a junior data analyst, and to me, he was less of a person and more of a concept, an ideal to strive for. But here in Owen's backyard, he was just a guy, a very, very charming guy. He was holding court by the sputtering grill, telling some story about a disastrous fishing trip, and he had three people, including Owen's normally cynical sister, completely captivated. He had this way of making eye contact that made you feel like you were the only person in the world he wanted to talk to. When he saw me looking, he raised his cup in a silent cheers and gave me a genuine, crinkle-eyed smile. My stomach did a little flip of pride. It felt good to be acknowledged, to be included in his orbit, even for a second. Everything was fine, better than fine, it was perfect. The night was perfect, the company was perfect, and my place in the universe felt, for a fleeting moment, completely secure. The party started to thin out around 11. The music got quieter, people started exchanging tired hugs and promises to do this again soon. Eventually, it was just a small knot of us left, maybe 6 or 7, gathered around the fire pit Owen had dug into his lawn. The flames licked at the cool night air, casting long, dancing shadows. Silas was still there, sitting on one of the rickety fold-out chairs, swirling the last of his beer in his cup. The mood had shifted from boisterous to something more intimate, more confessional. That's when he started the story. "You know," he began, his voice a low, mesmerizing rumble, "it's funny what people think they can get away with. I heard this story once about a guy, a real nobody, and he figured out a way to commit the perfect murder." A couple of people chuckled. It sounded like the beginning of a pitch for a Netflix show. I settled in, pulling my hoodie tighter. A good ghost story was the perfect way to cap off the night. "This guy," Silas continued, leaning forward, his eyes reflecting the fire, "he knew this woman. And he wanted her gone, but he was smart. He knew that violence is messy, traceable, so he went for something elegant." He paused, letting the silence hang in the air. "He faked her suicide." The story was intricate. He talked about how the killer slowly, methodically manipulated the victim's digital footprint, creating a false narrative of escalating depression. He described how the killer got her to take a specific combination of prescription drugs, framing it as a kind of holistic New Age therapy. It was all very clever, very detached. I was listening with a kind of academic interest, admiring the narrative. And then he said the detail. "The real genius of it, though," Silas said, a hint of admiration in his voice, "was the book. The night she died, he made sure she was found with a very specific book open on her nightstand. A really obscure academic text on ancient cartography." The air in my lungs turned to ice. Ancient cartography, it wasn't just a detail, it was a key. A key that unlocked a dusty, forgotten room in the back of my mind. A few years ago, maybe 3 or 4, back when I still obsessively read local news blogs, I'd seen a small article. A human interest piece about a tragedy. A young woman, a local, had taken her own life. The police ruled out foul play immediately. The article, trying to paint a picture of her life, mentioned her recent, peculiar obsession with a book on ancient map making. It was such a strange, specific detail that it had stuck with me. My beer suddenly tasted like metal. My heart started a frantic, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I tried to tell myself it was a coincidence. It had to be. It was a weird detail, sure, but the world is full of weird details. I forced myself to breathe, to focus on Silas's voice, trying to find the seams, the proof that this was just a story he'd cooked up. I must have been staring, my face a mask of disbelief, because the story kept getting worse. It was like watching a car crash in slow motion. Silas, with the casual air of a master craftsman explaining his trade, went on. He talked about creating an alibi that was not just solid, but almost comically mundane. Attending a suburban movie theater to see a terrible romantic comedy, keeping the ticket stub. He explained the psychological brilliance of choosing a victim whose family was already predisposed to believe in her instability. You don't just kill a person, Silas mused, looking into the fire. You kill the very idea that they could have been murdered. The other people around the fire were rapt. Someone murmured, "Dude, you should write this stuff down." Another person laughed, "Yeah, Silas, don't quit your day job, but you've got a backup career." My own laughter was a dry, brittle thing caught in my throat. I couldn't speak, I couldn't move. Then he delivered the final, crushing blow. "In the name," he said, almost as an afterthought, a final flourish. The name of the woman in the story, it was Alara. Alara, the name from the news article. The name I hadn't been able to recall until he said it, and now it was there, screaming in my head. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a confession. A goddamn public confession disguised as a party anecdote. The small group around the fire clapped lightly, a smattering of applause for a well-told tale. "Bravo," someone said, "creepy as hell." They started to get up, stretching, announcing it was time for them to head home. The spell was broken for them, for me it had just been cast. I remained frozen in my chair, my blood feeling thick and slow in my veins. Through the dispersing bodies and the haze of smoke, Silas's eyes found mine. They cut through the darkness with an unnerving precision. The charming, avuncular smile was still playing on his lips, the same smile he'd given me hours ago. But it meant something entirely different now. Slowly, deliberately, he raised his hand. He brought his index finger up to his mouth, pressing it against his lips. SHHH. It wasn't a gesture, it was a command, it was a threat. In that one silent moment, the world of fairy lights and friendly chatter and cheap beer evaporated. It was just me and him and the roaring fire between us and the terrible, suffocating knowledge of what he had just told me. He knew that I knew. The story wasn't for everyone, it was just for me. Title: I think my boss confessed to a murder at a party. What the hell do? I don't even remember saying goodbye to anyone. My brain just switched to autopilot. One minute I was staring into the face of a monster, the next I was in my car, my hands shaking so violently I could barely fit the key into the ignition. I drove home in dead silence, the radio off, my own ragged breathing filling the car. I locked my front door, slid the chain across, and leaned against it, my heart hammering against my ribs like it wanted out. I didn't sleep, not for a second. The image of Silas putting his finger to his lips was burned onto the inside of my eyelids. Every time I closed them, I saw it, SHHH. The first thing I did was tear my apartment apart looking for my old laptop. It took me 20 minutes to find the damn thing and another 10 for it to boot up. Then the frantic search began. I didn't know the exact date, just a vague 3 or 4 years ago. I typed in every keyword I could think of. Local woman suicide, Ilara death, cartography book suicide. Nothing. The search engines were flooded with generic mental health resources and articles about famous suicides in history. It felt like I was going insane, like I'd imagined the whole thing. Then I tried a different approach. I went to the online archive of the local paper, the Crestwood Herald. I started scrolling backwards month by month, year by year. It was a soul-crushing, terrifying process. Every headline about a death made my stomach clench. Finally, after what felt like an eternity in the digital archives for May 2019, I found it. The headline was small, unassuming. Local librarian's death ruled a suicide. The photo was a grainy, black-and-white headshot of a young woman with kind eyes and a shy smile. And the name, Ilara Vance. I read the article, my blood turning to ice water. It was all there. Every detail Silas had recounted with such casual bravado. The official cause of death was an overdose of sleeping pills combined with alcohol, leading to a fall from her second-story apartment balcony. The police report quoted in the article stated there was no evidence of forced entry or struggle and the case was closed. It mentioned her parents were devastated and had told reporters she'd been struggling with severe depression. And there it was, the final damning sentence. Friends say Vance had become increasingly withdrawn in her final months, spending most of her time alone, engrossed in her esoteric hobby of studying ancient cartography. I printed the article. I don't know why, maybe I just needed to see it to hold a physical piece of paper that proved I wasn't losing my mind. I sat there at my kitchen table, the sun starting to creep through the blinds, staring at the printed page and the smiling face of Ilara Vance. He didn't just tell a story, he bragged, he performed it, and that gesture, that wasn't a warning, it was an invitation into his sick, twisted world. What do? I have to go to work on Monday, I have to walk into that office and sit 30 feet away from him. I have to pretend that I just think he's a great storyteller. Do I quit? Just pack a bag and run? Do I go to the police? With what? A story he told at a party, a 4-year-old news clipping. They'd think I was a lunatic. He'd probably get me fired for making baseless accusations. He knows I know. He looked right at me. He made sure I understood. I feel like I have a target on my back. Walking into the office on Monday was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. The familiar smell of stale coffee and industrial-grade carpet cleaner, usually a smell of comforting routine, now felt like the air in a mausoleum. Every friendly morning Reese felt like a potential threat. Every normal office sound, the drone of the printers, the clicking of keyboards, the cheerful ring of a phone, was amplified, grating on my raw nerves. I felt like a spy, an imposter in my own life. I kept my head down, my eyes glued to the beige fabric of my cubicle wall, trying to become invisible. It didn't work. Around 10 o'clock, an email popped up in my inbox. The sender, Silas Thorne, the subject, quick chat. My blood ran cold. I felt a wave of nausea so intense I had to grip the edge of my desk. This was it. He was going to call me in, close the door, and I'd never be seen again. My mind raced with paranoid fantasies, him poisoning my coffee, him having a silent, loyal associate waiting for me in his office. I walked the 30 feet to his glass-walled office on legs that felt like they were made of wet cement. The entire floor seemed to be watching me, their faces blurry and indistinct. He was on the phone when I got there, but he saw me, smiled, and waved me in. The same goddamn smile. He gestured for me to take a seat. I sat on the edge of the plush leather chair, my back ramrod straight, my hands clenched into fists in my lap. He finished his call with a hearty laugh. "Sorry about that, Reese," he said, his voice dripping with the same easy charm from the party. "Just finalizing the quarterly reports, always a nightmare." He leaned back, steepling his fingers. "I wanted to grab you because I've been looking over your performance metrics. They're good, really good. You've got a sharp mind." I managed a weak, croaking sound that was supposed to be thank you. "I'm thinking of putting you on the new Henderson account," he continued, his eyes fixed on me. "It's a big one, high pressure, high stakes, but high reward." He paused, then stood up and walked over to the small coffee machine in the corner of his office. "Coffee?" "No, thank you, sir," I managed to say. He poured himself a cup, his back to me. "You know, Reese," he said, his voice casual, conversational, "pressure is a funny thing. In this business, it's everything. It forges diamonds, but it also breaks things. The key is knowing how to handle it, knowing what to absorb and what to let go of. Knowing what's important and what's just a story." He turned around, holding the steaming mug. He took a slow sip, his eyes never leaving mine. "You look tired, son. You getting enough sleep?" he asked, his voice laced with a terrifying, paternal concern. "You have to take care of yourself. It's crucial to know what to say and when to say it. More importantly, you have to know what not to say. That's the real secret to getting ahead." He wasn't talking about the Henderson account. He wasn't talking about my performance metrics. He was twisting the knife he'd stuck in me on Saturday night. Every word was perfectly chosen, a delicate instrument of psychological torture. He was showing me that he was in complete control. He could talk about the murder without talking about it. He could threaten me with a smile and an offer of a promotion. I wasn't an employee. I was a plaything. Update, I think I'm going to be sick. I've been sitting here for an hour, just staring at my screen. I feel like I'm in the middle of one of those psychological thrillers, the kind where the main character slowly realizes he's the only sane person in a world that's been subtly twisted against him. "I've been reading through all your comments, thank you, by the way, I mean it, and one of them sent me back to the article. A user named Just a Theory wrote, 'Forget the story for a second. Killers like this, especially the smart, arrogant ones, don't do things randomly. There's always a reason, not a good reason, but a practical one.' Who was Alara Vance? Not just a librarian. Who did she know? Who was her family?" It was like a splash of cold water to the face. In my panic, I'd focused entirely on the how. The book, The Fake Suicide, Silas's terrifying performance. I never stopped to think about the why. I pulled up the news article again, my hands shaking. I forced myself to read it slowly this time, word by word, not as a horror story, but as a data set. And then I saw it. It was a single, innocuous sentence tucked away at the very end of the piece, almost an afterthought. "She is survived by her father, Robert Vance, the former chief technology officer at the tech firm Sonova." Sonova, my blood turned to lead. Sonova wasn't just some random company. 4 years ago, Sonova was our biggest competitor. They were smaller, more agile, and they had a groundbreaking piece of software that was poised to completely wipe our flagship product off the map. Everyone in the industry was talking about it. Then they just collapsed. I opened a new tab and started digging. It wasn't hard to find the old business news. In late May 2019, just weeks after his daughter's suicide, Robert Vance took an indefinite leave of absence from Sonova, citing a personal family tragedy. Without its lead architect, the software project floundered. The company's stock plummeted. 3 months later, my company, Silas's company, acquired Sonova for a fraction of its original value. I remember that acquisition. It was the stuff of company legend. It was the deal that propelled Silas from being a respected senior VP to the untouchable regional director he was today. It was hailed as a masterstroke of aggressive, visionary business. But it wasn't a business deal, it was the spoils of war. He didn't kill Ilara Vance because of passion or hatred. He killed her to break her father. He destroyed a family to win a corporate battle. He treated a human life as a strategic asset to be neutralized. The story at the party, it wasn't just a confession, it was a trophy. He was showing it off. The world tilted on its axis. Suddenly, everything made a horrifying kind of sense. The casual cruelty, the absolute confidence, the way he looked at people as if they were pieces on a chessboard. I wasn't dealing with a common murderer who'd snapped. I was dealing with a predator who operated on a plane of existence where morality was just a quaint, outdated concept. He wasn't a psychopath in the traditional sense. He was the logical endpoint of corporate ambition. Going to the police was completely off the table. What could I possibly say? My boss acquired a rival company 4 years ago, and I have a theory that he murdered the lead engineer's daughter to make it happen. They would laugh me out of the station. He had built a fortress of plausible deniability around himself, and I was just a terrified junior analyst with a half-remembered news story. There was only one thing I could do. I had to get out. I spent the rest of the day in a fugue state, going through the motions of my job, my screen a meaningless blur of spreadsheets and charts. That evening I went home and wrote my resignation letter. It was the most surreal document I've ever composed. "Dear Mr. Thorne," I typed, "please accept this letter as formal notification that I am resigning from my position as junior data analyst, effective 2 weeks from today. I have appreciated the opportunity to work here, but I have decided to pursue a different career path." Every word felt like a lie. Every polite, professional sentence was a mask for the screaming terror I felt inside. The next morning, I walked back into that office, the folded letter in my jacket pocket feeling as heavy as a brick. I didn't wait for him to summon me. I walked straight to his door, knocked once, and entered. He was on a call just like the day before. He motioned for me to sit. I remained standing. When he hung up, the charming smile was back in place. "Reese, to what do I owe the pleasure?" I didn't say a word. I just walked to his massive mahogany desk and placed the letter on his blotter. He looked down at the envelope, then back up at me. For the first time, the smile vanished. It didn't fade, it was just gone, as if it had been a switch he'd flipped off. His face became a blank, emotionless canvas. He picked up the letter, slid it open with a silver letter opener, and read it. His eyes were cold, analytical. When he finished, he didn't look angry, he looked disappointed. He leaned back in his big leather chair, tapping the letter against his desk. He scrutinized me, his gaze piercing, as if he were reevaluating a flawed asset. "The story," he said, his voice flat, stripped of all its performative warmth. "It was a test. I tell it to certain promising new hires, the ones I think have potential." He paused, letting the silence stretch, letting the full weight of his words sink in. "I want to see who's smart enough to understand what it really means. Who's loyal enough and ambitious enough to hear that story and keep their mouth shut. I want to see who understands that to achieve real success, you sometimes have to operate outside the accepted rules. I thought you were that person, Reese. I was planning on bringing you into my inner circle." He tossed the letter onto his desk, a gesture of final, dismissive contempt. "But you're not. You let fear get the best of you. You heard a story about power and all you saw was a monster. You didn't see the opportunity." He shook his head slowly, a flicker of something like pity in his eyes. "You failed the test. Final update, it's over, I'm out. I'm writing this from a coffee shop 3 towns over with 2 suitcases in the trunk of my car. I'm moving. I don't know where yet, just away. Thank you all for the comments and the advice. It helped just knowing I wasn't screaming into the void. I worked out my 2 weeks in a state of quiet, numb terror." Silas never spoke to me again. He looked through me as if I were a ghost. On my last day, HR handed me my final paycheck and a non-disclosure agreement that was about an inch thick. I signed it without reading it. It didn't matter. He didn't have me killed. He didn't threaten my family. He didn't need to. He'd already won. I lost a job that on paper was the beginning of a brilliant career. I lost any sense of safety I ever had in a corporate environment. I lost the naive belief that the world is governed by a basic set of rules that everyone more or less follows. He let me go because in his world I'm irrelevant. I'm not a threat. I'm just the guy who failed the test. The real horror isn't the story he told by the fire. The real horror is that he lives in a world where that story is considered a lesson in management. The horror is knowing that there are people like him, sitting in corner offices, who see human lives not as sacred but as leverage. I survived, but there's a cost. It's this cold knot of dread in my stomach that I don't think will ever go away. It's the knowledge that the monsters aren't hiding in the shadows. They're standing in the light, giving keynote speeches and winning awards, and their stories are the ones that shape the world. And I just had to learn to live with that.